Hey, everybody from YouTube. I was out at Lake Mooney 2 weekends ago and had some unbelievable pre-spawn action out there. Caught a bunch of bass, a couple of really nice bass out there at Lake Mooney in this whole pre-spawn period that we've got going on right now. And the water temperature out there was about 51, 52 degrees, which is that typical pre-spawn mode. And actually, we've had a cold front come through recently, so I'm not sure if the temperature went up any, but I'll find out on Sunday. But anyways, yeah, just to let you know, the pre-spawn period out there, water temperature 50, 51 degrees, and I was catching them on jerkbaits. Jerkbait is a pretty lethal lure this time of the year. You can use jigs as well. You can use chatterbaits. I usually like to slow roll a chatterbait, but the jerkbaits was working really well. Picked that up from a tournament out at Occoquan that they had, and they said they were catching them on the jerkbaits, suspended jerkbaits, right? So if you're not familiar with a suspended jerkbait, it looks something like this. And what a jerkbait, suspended jerkbait, the value in that is you can actually reel it and get it down into that target depth for those bass, right? So a lot of these bass, like I said, they're kind of in that pre-spawn staging area, right? So about 6 to 8 feet down, somewhere in that range, and that's usually down near a spawning area, or it's going to be near deeper water. Okay, and so it's the bass were on these slopes, if you will. And same thing out at the Occoquan Reservoir. They had a tournament out there. They were catching them with suspended jerkbaits on slopes, 8 to 10, 6 to 8 feet of water, somewhere in that range. That was near deeper water. And sure enough, same thing on Mooney as well. And the thing once again about live scope, the thing I love about live scope is you could see where the fish were staging on these slopes, right? And you could just go out and go from slope to slope and be able to catch these bass. Now, if you're not familiar, if you're new to bass fishing, or if you want to become a better bass fisherman, I know some of the seasoned veterans, if you're watching this, you already get it. But if you're new to bass fishing, it'd probably be helpful to talk about one of the most fundamental things that I think you really need to understand in order to increase your chances of catching bass, depending upon what phase of the spawn you're in. But there's typically 3 phases to the spawn for bass. There's the pre-spawn time, which is where I was at 2 weeks ago at Lake Mooney, right? And that's where they're kind of bass are in this sort of feeding frenzy, if you will, getting ready for the spawn period. Then you have the actual spawn period where they move up on the beds. Females lay the eggs, and then the male guards the beds. And then you have post-spawn. Okay, post-spawn is where they're recovering from the spawning period, and they resort back to their normal feeding patterns. This is typically what we call the, kind of like the summertime pattern, right? That we're all very familiar with. But in the pre-spawn phase, like where I was 2 weeks ago, water temperature can be 45 to 55 degrees, right? And this is where the bass are actually getting out of their winter pattern, right? Which is typically deep, and they're lethargic. They're not feeding very much. And they start to move into shallower water, not the shallowest, but shallower water. And the feeding can be pretty aggressive, right? So a lot of times you'll find these bass at this temperature around secondary points, creek channels, drop-offs near flats, and some of the lures that can work really well are jerkbaits. Like I said, I used a jerkbait out there at Lake Mooney. You can slow roll a spinnerbait near the bottom. Jigs are great. Lipless crankbaits are great. Chatterbait is good too. The thing I like about jerkbaits and the thing I love about jigs is you can get it down to that target zone, right? And live scope helps because you can actually see where your lure's at, right? If you're working a suspended jerkbait, you can actually see where that lure is at, and are you in that zone, right? And then the tip obviously is target those transition zones between deeper and shallower water, and that's exactly where these bass were at Lake Mooney. Now, once the water temperature starts to heat up a little bit and you get 60 to 75 degrees, that's where you get into the spawning period, right? And you'll see the females are going to start making the nests. They're going to lay the eggs. The males are going to guard those nests, and you can usually see them. They're like a circular pattern. You'll see them in shallow water, right? So shallow flats, coves, backwater areas are usually pretty good areas to fish. in terms of the lures that you can use, this is where soft plastics, finesse worms, drop shot rigs are really a lot of fun to fish with, right, when they're up in the shallows. And once again, the fishing techniques is look for those beds in shallow water. A lot of times you can sight those beds depending upon the clarity of the water, but it can be a lot of fun to fish during the spawning area. Now, once the water temperature gets up 75 or higher, that's typically when the spawning period's over, right? And you're going to have big females. They're going to move toward deeper water. The bass are going to get into that summertime feeding pattern. And the strategy there is you want to look for points, ledges, structure near deeper water. All that stuff is good places to hunt for big bass. Some of the best lures you can use are like top water lures early in the morning or really late in the evening. That can be a lot of fun. These bass will come in up to the shallows and start feeding in the early morning or late evening. And then during once you get past those early morning hours, you can use worms, you can use jigs, you can use crankbaits to kind of to catch yourself the bass there. But the other thing is when the heat is on, you're going to want to look for target shade and cover. And if you have cover and structure that's in somewhat deep water, near deeper water, that's always a good spot, especially here in Virginia. I've had a lot of success with that. But I would caution you not to fish in the deepest water. And the reason is a lot of times with the heat, there's a thermocline layer that gets created, and you don't want to be underneath that thermocline layer because there's no oxygen there. Fish aren't going to be there. So you want to figure out where that thermocline layer is. You can see that on your sonar. I have another video on that. You can check it out. There's a lot of information on the web as well. But anyways, those are the three basic phases of the spawn for bass. And anyways, so let's get to the action. Pre-spawn action, Lake Mooney. Thanks for watching. Okay, folks, basically what I'm doing is I'm working this suspended jerkbait on these slopes, right? So where I'm fishing is there's a pretty significant slope. Believe it or not, right there is about at least 10 feet of water. So it drops off pretty dramatically from the shoreline. So I'm looking at these slopes, working this suspended jerkbait, getting it down about 6 to 8 feet, and then kind of I'll stop reeling, and then keep keep working the jerkbait to see if I can get one of these bass to hit. So usually this time of year they're pretty aggressive, and like I said, jerkbait is a great lure to try out. And once again, just coming across. Yep, there he is. Yep, coming right across that ridge, and I hooked up with a nice bass.
Oh, that's a big one. Oh, that's a nice one. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Whew. That's a beauty. Oh yeah. That is a beautiful bass. Woo. That's a dandy, huh?
Okay.
There's one.
Yeah, this time I'm looking at bass, and once again they're staging right on the slope. Right, so actually this time I could see them on the live scope. So I'm going to work this jerkbait hopefully right in that target zone. The nice part about suspended jerkbaits is they don't float. They kind of suspend, right? But you can use the diving bill to get it down to that target depth, and you can just let it stop reeling, and then put some action on it right at that same depth. That's really nice about suspended jerkbaits. They don't like immediately float back up to the surface like like a lot of crankbaits do. So it can make them really lethal. Like I said, to get it into that associated strike zone. Now, if you'll notice here, I just hooked up with one, but if you look at the live scope real quick, you can see how steep some of these ridges are. Like when they're right there, you can see it. You can just see how steep that is. Right, and like I said, I'm running that. We were right in that 6 to 8 foot range, and that's where most of the bass were staging that day, which was pretty cool.
Oh, that's another beauty. Woo! That's another beauty. Oh, another nice bass. Yes, sir. That's a good one. Yeah, beauty.
Okay, here I was basically trolling with a jerkbait, but it's designed for deep diving jerkbait.
Oh, bam!
And I'm out in open water, and I rolled it right across basically a hump out in the middle that had had deep drop-offs on each side. And don't discount open water. If it's got the right sort of structure on it, because it can be pretty lucrative. This bass was over 5 pounds. It was a beauty, but once again, same sort of pattern, but this one is a little bit deeper, but still in that staging area.
Look at that.
On the sides of these ridges down deeper, so it's pretty cool.
It's freaking huge, man. Boy, that's a fatty.
Okay, everybody, hope you enjoyed the video. Pre-spawn action on Lake Mooney. Thanks for watching.